Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the glorious mess of building your own business with the people doing it. I'm your host and fellow business builder, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into some good, honest, small business chat. Hello, listener and wonderful human, here to hear about the evolving business journeys of others, to feel seen, heard, and inspired for your own continuing business adventure. My guest today, Hayleigh, is a lovely human doing great things and challenging herself every day, which in the world of service-based business can really push you to your personal edges. In this chat and the story of creating her VA business, you'll hear her share about our abilities to teach ourselves what we need to know on the go. Honestly, where would we be without YouTube? Making do with what we have when getting started, an important message as we really don't need to have everything perfect before we get going. Learning to charge what you're worth and beyond. Marketing for growth even when you're not in the market for it. And learning how to say no to the wrong clients. Business solidarity and supporting each other through it all is what we're here for. So let's get you into the chat. I'm here with Hayleigh Watson, aka your Hali Helper. Hayleigh runs a virtual assistant agency that specialises in helping overwhelmed women-led businesses by lightening the load so they can flourish in life and business as a virtual assistant, social media manager, and graphic designer all in one, with a high-touch service tailored to the businesses she works with. Described as a saving grace by her clients and driven by her values of trust, helpfulness, and creativity, she's working to bring the joy back to business for so many of us who are at times struggling to keep up. When she's not being crazy helpful, she's showing up on the Girls Gotta Work podcast, riding the highs and lows of business ownership with the gals who get it. As someone very familiar with riding the wave of business development herself and through those she helps, I am very excited to hear this story. Hayleigh, welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I love your podcast. I'm like fangirling.
That is lovely. Thank you. It also makes me feel like so awkward because sometimes I forget that people actually listen. And I think that's the strange thing with audio mediums, podcast mediums like this is you are talking to people, but they can't talk back. So this is why I'm always encouraging, please DM me, leave a review or something where I can are you real people? So thank you for saying that's very kind.
You're welcome.
So I'd love to know a bit more about you. Thinking of your best friend, how might they describe you?
I would say I'm very kind, and I mean, it's in the business name as well. I'm very helpful, but I love going above and beyond for people because they might not have the experience that everyone else has. So I like to incorporate that and make them feel really special. So I do that in my business and my podcast and my life in general.
I think it's such a wonderful approach. You know, the more we lean into gifting our time and our knowledge to each other, it comes back in ways that we can't expect. So don't lose that as you go through the process. But let's go back a little ways. So before you're sat here with me, before you are building your own business, before Hali Helper, who were you?
Well, I currently live in Melbourne, but I grew up in far north Queensland from Cairns originally, and I actually was raised by my grandparents. I lived with them from 14 months old until I moved out of home at 18, and now, unfortunately, they're both gone, but I'm very grateful for having them raise me, even though it was a very different upbringing compared to all my friends at the time. I've lived in Melbourne for almost 6 years now, and Melbourne didn't quite feel like home when I first moved here, but I was also going through like a breakup and a bit of soul searching. And now that I've settled into my life and since the breakup, I feel more myself here and it feels like home, but I'm never now opposed to moving anywhere else. I was one of those kids in high school that had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. And even now I'm like, what do I want to be? And I remember always telling people I would travel or I would figure it out. I just didn't have any role models on something outside of teacher, doctor, nurse. I can't even think of another profession. And I was like, none of that excites me. None of it makes sense to me. And I think growing up with my grandparents, they didn't when they had me, they didn't like, since I knew them, they didn't work. So I didn't have examples of like business owners. I didn't have examples of hustling or doing other things. It was just money came in and that was it. And I was like, oh, okay, this doesn't make any sense to me, but okay, here I am. And then when I turned 18, I moved out of home and I was like, got to get a job, need the money. But I was also studying a bachelor in graphic design and performance. So I love the theatre. I love graphic design. Now being on stage would scare the living daylights out of me, but it also helps me get on like stories and like get my face in front of the camera. So I always wanted to have some kind of graphic design business. I just didn't know how to make that happen. And while I was doing that, I did heaps, like a stupid amount of customer service in my part-time jobs. When I finished uni, because I lived in a small town, there was no jobs, like none. And in that moment, I wish I could have like jumped feet first and like, okay, I can just do it by myself. But I was way too scared. I did not have the support system around me to like encourage me and be like, Hayleigh, you can do that. It was just, I love my hometown, but very small town mentality. Like, don't go outside of the box. Like, really, well, the people I was surrounded by back then was very like, stay in your lane. Like, don't mess anything up. Don't go out of your way. Like, it's fine. You can just have the same job forever. And that just didn't make any sense to me. So I did actually stay in lots of jobs that I hated for a really long time. And then I finally got my air quote dream job as a graphic designer and sales support person. And I hated it. I was bullied out. One of the like admin ladies did not like me whatsoever, and she just made my life hell. And it was the first time I've ever done anything so reckless, and I quit without anything. I had zero savings. I was like a 22-year-old. I knew nothing. I had no savings, and I just was like, I can't do this anymore. I thought this was my dream job, and I just left. And when I left and I walked, after I put in my notice and I walked out the door, I still had to work another 2 weeks, but I walked out the door, there was like a rainbow. And now I know anytime, like I see a rainbow, it's like, I don't know how woo-woo your audience is, but I'm like, it's a sign. I did the right thing.
I mean, definitely, listener might feel differently about this, but I'm like even level of woo-woo. Like, I'm at that point where in my desk, where my desk is, where my setup is, my home office is, my studio, my everything, there's a window to my right. And I had a few days where this huge wasp would come and like tap on the window. And it wasn't like a European or something. It was like one of those ones it's big and it's orange. And it was like, as it would hit the window, I was like, my God, is that a small dinosaur? Like, is this going to get into my office here? But so I'm at that woo-woo level where something like that happens and I Google, what's the spirit, like, what is this wasp? First of all, what's the name of it? I forgot it now, but I'm like, second, what is the spiritual meaning of this? And it was, something like, keep going. It was kind of like anyway, that's how woo-woo I get. So I'm here for a rainbow. But you raise a couple of really interesting, points there. I think it's so common for us to only see, and it's common for everybody to only see the pathways that are presented through the schooling system, through what family and friends and those in your general vicinity do have. And, not only that, we're somewhat restricted by the different pathways that exist within systems that we can see. So, even if you do decide that education is something you feel really passionate about and you want to become a teacher, the pathways that exist beyond teaching in a school, be it a private tutoring business or, traveling to regional locations or developing new learning systems and patent and, like working through trademark systems and putting that through government initiative. There's just so many things that you can do. And I think it's very familiar for a lot of us to not know where we're going and to not see the potential of where we're heading at as well. So that was very brave of you to step out and go into the unknown. What were your first few steps after you stepped out?
Panic applied to a bunch of things. Yeah, it was just like, now I need a paycheck and I need to figure it out. And then I ended up at a Telstra call center and I actually loved it. It gave me space to figure out what I wanted to do. I started a side hustle. I was attending markets with my design work. I made like really corny, but the best kind of pun greeting cards and posters. And I got to have a steady income and do that on the side. And then, yeah, I just had to figure it out. And then I was there for about 3 years at Telstra. And then my grandma passed away, which was like the pivotal moment of like, I don't need to stay in Cairns anymore. So that was like when I decided to move to Melbourne as well.
So tell me about the seed of creating your business. When did having your own thing start to come into your mind, and what came next?
I think when I was going to the markets every other weekend and figuring that out, I was like, there's something here. I love it. It just absorbs so many good hours in my life. And I like time just flies and I have to figure it out. But I didn't straight away. And then I was working in customer service when I moved here. And I started going to networking events and going to like speaking events and trying to figure it out. I was like, there's something here. I just got to figure out what it is. And then I learned about virtual assisting and I was like, this makes sense to me. This makes sense. It's like the helping I want to do. I get to do graphic design. I get to do the admin that I've been doing for so long and I'm really great at. I get to do customer service, which I love. And I was like, in January of 2020, I was like, this is what I'm going to do this year. I'm going to like start doing it on the side and then I'll be able to leave my normal 9 to 5 and make it happen. And then I got made redundant in June of 2020. And I was like, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it.
Take me to the days where you were facing that, that funny time period after something like a redundancy where you're looking at this business that's been kind of ticking away in the background of your mind, but that's now all of a sudden your full-blown focus. What became your priorities in the establishment of both the business model and also the actions that you had to take to get the clients through the door?
I would not say that I had a business model whatsoever. I was already like a big personal development junkie. So I was already doing that kind of work. So I just started buying business books and reading them and trying to figure it out, doing as much research as I could. I'm like a certified business YouTube Googler. Like that's how I figure things out, as most of us do. I think the first step for me, which is not the most practical now that I have hindsight on my side, is a logo and a business name. And I knew I always wanted to help women in business because that's a big thing for me I wanted to have support when I wanted dreams. And I was like, I want to do that for other women in business and support their dreams. So that was always a big thing. I kind of already knew that. But it was just like, it was really scrappy. Like I had my logo, I had a name, I got an Instagram. I didn't have a website for the first like almost year and a half of my business. I did everything via Instagram. All my leads come from there. I don't have an email list, which is all I'm shunned upon for that as well sometimes. But it was really just one step in front of the other and figuring it out every day and just learning a new thing each and every day. And there's so many things I didn't think I could have learned until it was happening right in front of me, like how to fire a client or how to sell yourself on Instagram, all that kind of stuff.
So many of us don't have that business model planned when we get started, or what we think a business model is supposed to look like is probably more my frame. I think there's many of us who assume that we have to have a business plan. I've never had one. I've actually tried to make one a few times, but
it's a rough outline.
Yeah, it's a rough outline in your head, and that can be just enough to kind of figure it out to be able to get things going. But I always find it really interesting digging into those places a little bit more. So whereas you might not have had a business plan as such, as you start going, you get those phases where you're like, okay, so I'm going to have a client come on and they're going to be, I'm going to charge them hourly or I'm going to retain them or something like that. So talk to me, I guess, a little bit about figuring that out. So you're like, okay, I know I'm going to get the clients. How am I going to service them?
I joined a bunch of virtual assistant Facebook groups. And I just was a fly on the wall. And I was kind of already in these groups before I started my business. Like as soon as I figured out what a virtual assistant was, that's when I joined these groups and was already like not necessarily taking notes physically, but mentally I would read what people were posting and figuring out how they did it. And then I just found a rate that felt comfortable for me. And I knew customer service was a big thing because it was a skill I already had. And then graphic design, I wanted that element in there somewhere. And then it's just been trial and error ever since.
I think many of us will underestimate the osmosis learning that we do by things like listening to this podcast. And, someone will say something relevant to an industry that's completely different to the one that you're in. And by osmosis, you go, oh yeah, that's in there now. And then it comes back out later. I think this is something I know that all of us do. How under did you rate yourself in terms of what you were charging clients? Now that you look back on it from where you were then to where you are now, how under did you go?
A lot, but also I don't feel like it was a lot at the same time. I felt that what I was charging for my skill level was on par. Did I stay at that level for too long? Yes.
So how did you approach changing it? That's really interesting because, I ask that because many of us in a service industry, myself included, particularly with skills that don't have a rate card or a union or anything in particular to draw from and are relevant to years of experience, skill set, the pressures of having a business. If even if you're in a solopreneur model, like you're in a sole trader model or a company, there's the cost of sale, the cost of doing business. But I ask that because so many of us undervalue ourselves. We're like, yeah, it's probably going to be about this. And you're like, oh, but I feel a bit sketchy charging that because of my confidence in myself, or I don't want to come off arrogant, or I don't want to scare clients away. So I'd love to know, I guess, your experience with raising your prices then and selling your prices. How did you go through that?
Yeah. So there's kind of two elements to this answer. The first is I would just slowly raise my prices. So every time I didn't advertise my pricing anywhere for a really long time. Only in the last 3 months have I got like a from price on my website. And now you can actually download my pricing before jumping on a discovery call, which is very different to how others have done it. So every time I had a discovery call, I would just raise my prices by $5 and see the reaction and kind of get a gauge from that. So that was like easy with new clients. That was fine. I was like, there's no skin in the game. I don't know these people. They could say no, it's fine. So I slowly raised it that way to the price that I have now. Talking to my existing clients and raising my prices was a whole other ball game. I had a small business coach at the time telling me I need to raise my prices. I was like, yep, got it. Sure. Check. Let's figure it out. I remember my first client that I had, which I had for almost 3.5 years. She's no longer one of my clients. That was the scariest thing I ever think I've done, which it really wasn't after it was done. But I built it up so much in my brain and in my body that I said to my partner at the time, I was like, I'm going to call her. We're going to talk about it on the phone. And then the day I said, say it was a Tuesday, I was like, I'm going to talk to her on Tuesday. I talked to her on the phone about something else. And then we hung up and I was like, oh, I didn't talk to her about the pricing. I felt physically sick. I don't know why. And like, even now I like laugh at myself like, you're so silly. Because by the time I finally worked up the courage to actually have a conversation with her about the pricing, she's like, of course, fine. Tell me how much it is. It's all good. So I think you do have to just kind of like go for it. But also I had to do that work because it was important to me. I didn't want to lose her for one. And I also cared about having good value in it that time because I hadn't been doing it very long. I didn't know the value that I was giving to her business. So it was a really validating experience to know that she values me a lot in her business to pay me the wage I want to be paid or the hourly figure I want to be paid, but also that it's not the end of the world and you're allowed to ask for what you want, Hayleigh.
Yeah, I think that financial journey is a really challenging one to go through because money in a service-based industry can be so deeply tied to your sense of self and your self-worth and all of those aspects. But it would be remiss of me to skip over something that you said earlier, which is, before you get to the point of setting your rates with a client, before you get to the point of raising your rates with a client, such a necessary journey as you evolve through the process, is finding clients in the first instance. And you mentioned not having a website and choosing social media to go down the route of finding clients. But I don't want to tell that story for you. Talk me through that. So talk me through sitting at a blank slate of marketing and getting yourself out there.
It's not a very interesting story in my mind, but I just did everything via Instagram. And I think about it now, like my main client at the time, I did about 30 hours a week for her. So I really didn't need to find, in theory, many other clients. So it wasn't like every month I needed to find 3 to 4 clients to fill the gap of a dollar figure or a amount of work to do. And then while that was like paying the bills and paying the things, I could just create a community or create a brand that people resonated with and wanted to come to me and have me help them because of my like nurturing nature. So I think that's how I was doing it. Like I had no marketing plan. I had no social media manager. I was just like figuring it out. I was probably posting lots of things in theory that probably weren't working, but something was just working. It was in the age of COVID and I'm from Melbourne, so we had lots of lockdowns, and then it just turned into word of mouth. And I was like, well, I guess I need a website now. I feel legit. Like it's all just been honestly trial and error. For a little while I had a social media marketer to help me, but the rest has all been really boringly just trying to figure it out myself.
You might feel like it wasn't interesting in terms of having a marketing plan or trial and error, or, many of the things that come with marketing in a social media space, which is, trialing new platforms and new delivery methods, or, new hooks and all that sort of crazy stuff that comes with getting yourself out there on Instagram, or if you're brand new to Instagram or TikTok, just learning to use the bloody thing and make things that are visually in the way you want to present yourself. Aside from all that, there's something in your story there where you had that client and you had that baseline, but it sounds like you knew where you wanted to head to in terms of having multiple clients and establishing yourself as, more that agency model where you could grow and eventually scale. And although you had that consistent work, still almost setting that appearance of I'm sourcing clients and I'm growing as an agency and I'm doing all of that. So, I don't know whether or not that was purposeful, but I think there's a great lesson there for someone who might be in a similar space where you got something that's ticking you over and, business, quote unquote, is growing because you're servicing in a manner that is, you've got this kind of main client that you're looking after, but still putting yourself out there in a way publicly that is growing your future pipeline and projecting that you perhaps are working with more than one to attract more than 3, more than 4, more than 5, to get that projection out there. There's always that fine balance of that fake it till you make it versus trying things so that when you do need it, you know how to go hard at it. So since you've been started, you've been going down this route and you've started to establish your brand position, your website, you started to add and layer, it sounds like, as you've begun this journey and figuring out your business as you go. What have been some of the key pivots that you've gone through since getting started and getting traction?
A big pivot was really figuring out that not being everything to everyone. I always had 3 kind of areas of interest, which was like admin, graphic design, and a little bit of social media, but really redefining what that looks like and looking at the tasks I just don't want to do. I don't have to be everything to everyone. When I jump on discovery calls or someone slides into the DMs and they ask me, do you use this platform or do you know how to do this? I used to be a yes girl and I'd say yes to everything. I'll figure it out. And there's lots of elements of that still need to happen, but I now just say no. I'm like, no, I don't know how to use that platform, because I think when people go to outsource, they do, without some education, want a quick fix. And that's not what a virtual assistant is most of the time. Like you have to put in the time and the energy to get out what you want. So now I'm really honest. And I think that's another big lesson, is being honest from the get-go and saying I'm not the right person for everyone. If someone is on a discovery call, I say I'm not the right person for you. Like this isn't going to work out. Personalities are too much of a clash. I used to go above and beyond to try and make it work with people that just weren't my people. So I think you can have a niche, but doesn't mean that the people in that niche are always going to be the perfect fit for you. So I think knowing yourself is really a powerful lesson to have when, especially service providers, you need to know who you are and who you're servicing and making sure that that's always really clear.
Has that ever felt like a scary experience for you to turn clients away? And if so,
yes.
Why has it been scary for you?
I mean, it comes from an element of always wanting to be liked and I personally never want to disappoint people. And that's like something that I'm a childhood trauma that I'm working through, but it's my nature to want to help so much that I forget that I'm important too. I am very introverted and I struggle from decision fatigue, very much so. And I once took on a client that has extreme ADHD, and we were just not a good match. And I was a yes person then. I was like, yeah, I'll figure it out. I can do this. I can work around your boundaries. I don't have any boundaries. You don't need to know mine. And I was just exhausting. I couldn't keep up with her. My introversion, my decision fatigue was just out of control while working with her. And I felt sick every time I saw her emails pop up. And I was like, I haven't done that thing because it's like 10 new things. And it just was not ever going to work. And I knew from the get-go, but I said yes anyway. So I think it is really scary because you might need that paycheck, but it's also, what did I lose for that paycheck? I ended up canceling our contract and giving her her money back because I couldn't service her. Like I couldn't help her the way she needed help. And it just was, our personalities were just not a good fit.
Yeah, I think that plays a much bigger part in service-based industries than we probably allow for. You've talked a little bit about introversion and, like getting to know yourself in that space. And I think that's always an interesting one. But it always surprises people to learn that I think based on one of the tests that I did a while ago in a corporate environment, that I was only 51% extroverted on that scale. So I have an element of that introversion, whereas I do need to have sort of quiet space and things like that to go back in when I'm exerting a lot of energy out or taking a lot on. But it's not about me, but I can't help but think about that level of introversion that you describe, and you're getting comfortable working with that with the experience of starting a podcast. So tell me how the podcast came about and the role that putting yourself out there has played in it, and what your dreams were for it when you got started.
Yeah, so it does feel weird being an introvert who does a podcast, but if I think about it, like I'm in the comfort of my own home. Like when I hop off this, I'm going to go sit on the couch for a good half hour and recharge. So it's not like a space where I need to be on all the time. I get to choose my energy. I think, just to stay on the introversion side of things for a little bit, is that I've learned how to channel it. And I'm like, when I've done one of those tests, I'm like 97% introverted, and people find it so crazy. But I choose my battles, and I choose, like, tomorrow I'm going to do all admin. I have no social commitments, so I'm fine. Like, it's good. I've got it figured out. Some days I don't. I forget. I think I'm an extrovert, and I'll book like 3 social things in a row and like, what was I thinking? But in starting the podcast, it was, I think because I am introverted, I do struggle with reaching out when I need help or when I need conversations, and it could have been a lack of research. But at the time when I was in the midst of starting the business, I had no one to talk to. I was still really new to Melbourne. It was lockdown. Like I had no real friends because they were all my work colleagues. I didn't know anyone who ran a business, and I just had to start creating space to have conversations about business. And that's kind of like how the podcast started, Girls Gotta Work, because no one was having the conversations that I was starting to have with my business besties that I started to make online. And yeah, I wanted to create a space where we could have real conversations and bitch about our clients sometimes, and bitch about how hard it is, and have a cry, and like tell each other it was going to be okay, because we didn't have that, especially during COVID, especially as all my friends, business friends at the time, were all online service providers. So we didn't have colleagues, and we wanted to create a space where we could have virtual biz besties.
What has surprised you about the process of running a podcast? Because being a podcast nerd myself, of course, I love these kinds of conversations. But in terms of setting it up for your goals in business, what has surprised you about the process of doing it, and what's changed?
I mean, that people listen. I think my favorite thing is when people do slide into the DMs or tell me like, I just loved this conversation. It made me feel so seen. It made me feel heard. I feel less alone. That is exactly what I wanted out of the podcast. I think the biggest pivot is that I started it with a partner, and we did the podcast together for about 1.5 years. And now I've been doing it by myself for the last almost 7 months. My business partner at the time, she was a social media manager and then kind of had enough of running her business, was super burnt out, and chose corporate life. So she felt no longer connected to the podcast. So that was like a really hard time. I was already burnt out in my normal in my Hali Helper business. And she told me, I was like, I mean, I can't say no, like I'm not going to force you. But we had been creating this community and this space, and I was like, I can't let this go. Like this can't end. There's something magical here. And it's filling my cup in a way that I'd needed. So I've been figuring it out ever since and doing it by myself.
Yeah, it's a bit of a wild process, isn't it? I think
Yeah.
it's very different to social media, to video creation, to all those sorts of things. It's obviously I have a very clear passion for it, and so good on you for sticking it out. What are your dreams for Hali Helper, and where do you think it might go for you?
Oh, this is such a good question because it's something I'm working on this year, very much so. My dreams for Hali Helper is to have it run wholeheartedly as an agency, and for me personally to like step out of the busy work and being more of that CEO role and getting to be the visionary, which I already am, but doing less of the busy work and more of the visionary and having more like actual staff. Right now, I just have subcontractors, but having real staff that my subcontractors are phenomenal, but knowing someone's there full time that has the exact same vision as me for the business is really powerful. So someone like that to help me to come in so I can have time off and do all the other things that running a business is meant to give you, that freedom, which I do have, but I also have a lot of clients and they have deadlines and I have deadlines. So to step out and be more of just the CEO rather than the doer.
What has surprised you about having subcontractors and working with people? How have you changed your direction for the business through the process of doing that?
I feel really lucky because one of my clients, they're a duo and they're leadership coaches. So I very selfishly not selfishly, they pay me, which is crazy, but I get to sit in on a lot of their courses and learn from them. So they were my clients before I brought on staff. So it helped me learn how to work with people better and how to manage better and really figure out how to lead people who are different to me, because that was a really scary thing. I was like, what if I find people and they don't like me or they're shit or they think, I don't know, something just different. So I feel very lucky that I got to do that work before subcontractors or being a leader even came into my mind. But I was like my school captain at my high school and I've always just kind of helped people and led people. So I think it was already in my nature to be able to pick up those skills easily. Doesn't mean I don't get scared of conflict or if I have to tell them off or if they miss a deadline. It's all still very scary and all very new, but it's all learning. And I think my biggest takeaway from it is just being honest from the get-go. I said to them, I was like, I'm just figuring this out. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think that honesty doesn't work for everyone. Like some people that might have scared them away, but the people I have on my team have the same values that I do and appreciate the honesty. So I think creating that environment from the get-go has been really powerful.
What is the thing in your business and your growth plans at the moment that's keeping you up at night at the moment? What are you focusing on and what's challenging you?
Right now, I'm working on like email marketing and lead gens and all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't say it keeps me up at night. It scares me, but I think the biggest thing that I grapple with in business in general is I am super ambitious and I'm very much a go-getter and I have decision fatigue and I'm an introvert. So it's like the universe has a sick sense of humor. I was like, why make me so ambitious but make me need to nap so much? Like it's unfair.
I can relate to that, but I also have the opposite where it's like I'm always so tired at like the middle of the day. Like it'll get to the mid-afternoon, I'm like, woof, I've already done and been so many things. I'm exhausted, but then it will get to the evening and I'm like, I've got a weird second wind. Like I could, this is like forcing myself not to go back to work at that stage. But yes, I can understand that, we have to hold these different parts of ourselves sometimes in business more than we have to in any other environment to understand that we grow with the business, plus it also challenges elements of ourselves and it's about working out what we need as we go through the process. It sounds as though you've got some exciting visions as you're going through the process and places you want to get to. And I always think it's such a wonderful opportunity that we get to hear from people who are looking at that. Okay, I've come this far and I've done this and I'm looking to scale and I'm looking to grow. And I think it's such a gift to share that experience with people as we are all going to be in those phases at different stages and just figuring out what it is that we need. But to help you get there, because as you've described, we're nothing without our network and learning from each other. How can we support you, me and the listener support you to grow your business?
That's so nice. Just connection, I think, and network. And I think if you're an ambitious woman-led business and need some help, like slide into the DMs. I want to talk to you. I get so bloody excited talking about business and your goals and your dreams. I want that so much for you. And like, I want to be able to help everyone and everyone, which I also know that I can't, but I want to. So yeah, definitely a lot of just jumping into the community, listening to the Girls Gotta Work podcast. Yeah, connection.
Well, I'll make sure to have the links to your show in the show notes, and also your website, which you now have, which looks fantastic,
Yeah,
and your socials, so that the listener can get around you. It is, a gift to hear your story, Hayleigh. So thank you for joining me today, and thank you for listening to this podcast and being a supporter of the show. I bang on about it all the time, but I can't tell you how much it means to me to be able to support other people. So thank you for being a listener too.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the podcast for small business builders with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you love it, you can say thanks with a star rating and a review. And of course, join the community on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Find us at Unemployed and Afraid wherever you're hanging out, and I'll see you there.